Generally calm people of Reddit. What made you lose your absolute shit that time?
My seventh fucking trip to the DMV when trying to reinstate my license. Every single time they scrutinized my paperwork and always managed to find something wrong and would send me away to fix it. On this seventh trip, they finally resorted to, "You have no proof that you ever had a license," despite my piles of paperwork showing my driving record, among other things. I refused to leave the seat and said, "You people are fucking monsters." A manager was called. We argued. He said he believed that I had had a license, but there was just no proof, and he couldn't risk accepting my paperwork in case someone checked it. I said I refused to leave the seat until I knew exactly what was needed. Manager said, "Tell you what, I can contact last state I lived in and could get a verification that I had had a license there. It would take 3 minutes." That's when I yelled in the DMV, "Why wasn't that the first fucking thing you said?" Anyway, I got my license back. I was always a really quiet kid, even as a toddler apparently. So one of the first times I remember losing my shit was when I got really tired of this third grader picking on me on the bus. I was in kindergarten, and this kid kept popping his head over my seat and poking me. I timed it out, and the next time he did, I punched him straight in the nose, which he immediately started bleeding and crying. I didn't know it at the time, but apparently the kid's parents tried to get some disciplinary action against me. That was until they found out I wasn't the same age or older. They just didn't want to make a big stink out of their kid getting bitch slapped by a kindergartner. It was Halloween, and I was sitting out the front of my house watching my sister take my niece, who was around 4, trick-or-treating. The people who lived above us, we lived in a maisonette, decided to shoot a firework at them. This is the only time Eve lost my shit. Got them inside the house, made sure they were all right. Sister had only a few non-serious burns on her arm and managed to shield my niece from the explosion. At that point, I was just so angry. Went up to their door and started banging on it, demanding they come out. They didn't answer, so I started trying to kick the door in. My mom and brother dragged me away and back inside to calm me down. Half an hour later, the police arrived because the neighbors had called them about me. Luckily, after we explained what had actually happened, I didn't get in any trouble. But neither did they. It was Halloween, and I was sitting out in front of my house, watching my sister take my niece, who was around 4, trick-or-treating. The people who lived above us, we lived in a maisonette, decided to shoot a firework at them. This is the only time I've lost my cool. I got them inside the house, made sure they were all right. My sister had only a few non-serious burns on her arm and managed to shield my niece from the explosion. At that point, I was just so angry. I went up to their door and started banging on it, demanding they come out. They didn't answer, so I started trying to kick the door in. My mom and brother dragged me away and back inside to calm me down. Half an hour later, the police arrived because the neighbors had called them about me. Luckily, after we explained what had actually happened, I didn't get in any trouble. But neither did they. Back when I was working retail, I was manning the return desk when this woman comes in to return 2 totes full of clearance clothes. She wants to rebuy them all since clearance stuff was now cheaper. That's against the rules, and I explain why, but per usual she gets a manager and the manager caves. Since she bought this stuff on 3 different receipts and mixed them all up, this transaction is fixing to take 30 minutes at least, and I am frustrated but hiding it well. 15 minutes and I hear some commotion off to the side. I turn my head and see that this woman's 5 or so completely unsupervised kids have piled onto a flat cart and are pushing it around. I don't know why it set me off so bad, but I pointed and yelled at them, raising my voice for the first and last time during my 10-year stint. The entire place fell silent, and the customer was so mad at her kids that she took her stuff and left. A couple co-workers said seeing me get angry was really unsettling. A blessing/curse that comes with being the quiet one, I guess. My brother and I played travel sports for a few seasons as kids. One trip, I was at the pool with some of his teammates messing around in the water, and the coach's kid was being a dick as usual. My brother was one of the smaller kids on his team, so the coach's son would fuck with him a lot. Most of the kids on my brother's team disliked him, but didn't speak up so they wouldn't be next. He thought it would be funny to pick up my brother's drink right in front of him and spit into it. My dad taught me from a young age not to let anyone fuck with my brother or sister, so I got seriously pissed. I took a good running start and shoulder checked him into the pool. Since he had just gotten there, he hadn't taken his clothes off yet and cried because his phone and iPod got ruined. He literally ran out yelling, "I'm telling my dad." Well, that backfired, because everyone stuck up for my brother, and the coach was not happy to find out what a shitbird his son was being, so he was the only one to get in any trouble. In high school, we had a friend who had chosen to be a little more promiscuous than others. We honestly didn't care. Besides enjoying sex, her personality was entirely the same. However, it's high school, so one girl in particular took it upon herself to often shame and tell this girl she was a slut. We would all stick up for her, be the bigger person, and walk away. Except one day, this girl decided to shove through our group, knocking said friend over, causing her to hurt herself. She laughed, called her a slut, and spit on her. I completely lost my shit, grabbed the girl by the hair as she walked away and yanked it, and then screamed at her that she's a hateful person because her mom chose crack over her. Then as I walked away, I pushed the door open so hard that when she tried to follow me, it swung back and hit her in the face. She stopped calling my friend a slut after that. Not my proudest moment, and I have not ever used physical violence or information that's meant to be private against another person again. It's always felt like my parents never wanted me. I was a surprise honeymoon baby born 9 months and a day after their wedding. I was regularly screamed at for anything I did until I just started hiding. I was called the practice child my whole life. My younger siblings got way more love and attention, etc. In my teens, they started taking in strays. If any neighborhood kids didn't want to go home, they could just be at our house all the time. Effectively, my mother would take my friends away from me to be her friends instead. One of which was a kid who picked on me constantly from the time I was 11. I guess they had that in common. That guy was kicked out of his dad's house and his mom's house when he was 20, so my parents took him in permanently. That killed me. But I always wanted their approval, so I was always calm and agreeable, always desperately trying to figure out how to get them to love me, so I went along with it. Years later, I'm married and have a son. This guy still lives with my parents. They continue to coddle and make excuses for him while criticizing me for whatever they feel like. One day, we're all at my parents' house and my son is being a goofy 2-year-old, which annoys the man-child living there. So he gets furious, picks my son up by his ankle and spanks him. My parents claimed not to have seen it. We went home. I couldn't sleep that night because I was so upset. The next morning, I made sure the guy and my mom would be at home, and why wouldn't he be there? And I went to confront them with my wife. I dumped everything I had been putting up with on them for about an hour, including asking how my mom could allow this jerk to hit my son. She maintained that it didn't happen, so I went through the roof. I ended up crying because of all the pin-up emotion, so my fantastic wife took over. She said we wouldn't be coming back if the guy still lived there. So he yelled that he would move out and he stormed off after saying he didn't have to listen to this. My parents convinced him not to move out shortly after we left. My mother expressed how disappointed she was that I didn't come to have a conversation and only came to dump on them. That was her big takeaway from everything I said, that I wasn't being fair to them. We went to counseling with them later. For months, it validated everything I had felt, but they never stopped lying and being defensive. One counselor said we should be on Dr. Phil. The other counselor said my mom is incapable of empathy. Both counselors called my parents delusional. But of course my parents didn't take any of that seriously. At one point my dad asked me, who does he think he is to judge us like that? As if he forgot that that's their job. Haven't spoken with him in almost a year, and life is so much better. I still feel bad about it, but my mom is a huge control freak when it comes to trips or vacations. This time we went to Portugal, the islands where my family is from, and she was doing her thing, bossing people around, rushing us from place to place so we could get to everything she had planned. My grandmother, her mother, was the reason for the trip. She was dying and wanted to go home one last time. It had been nearly 60 years since she left the island for Canada, and we pushed her around in a chair the entire trip. My grandmother was very weak and kept asking us to go to her home village of Maria. It was in the plan, but near the end of the trip, sort of set up as a finisher before we left the island to return to Canada. Like the title says, I am normally very calm, and I don't raise my voice often unless it's out of excitement or comedic effect. I shouted out over everyone, who all wanted to go in different directions, see different places, and eat different food. Holy fucking hard stop, shut the fuck up. That got everyone's attention. I threw my hand at my mother to point her out. We all appreciate your organization skills and for getting us here, but now that we are here you need to step back a little. We got a dozen adults and a dozen teenagers here. We can take care of our goddamn selves. I waved my arm across the group of my cousins. You shit socks need to get your shit back in the sack. You're all over the fucking place. Disrespectful ducks. We are here for a family vacation, and when we are done doing our family shit, then you can go and play in the ocean. Finally pointing at my grandmother, and I thought this trip was for her and Grandpa. She's getting weaker by the day and wants to go home. So we are going to load up into those tiny fucking vans and drive to the other side of the island and put this lady in the ocean now before she's too weak to do it later. Maybe if you stopped ignoring her for 5 minutes, you'd realize you're all being a bunch of fucking dicks to her. We silently loaded up into the vans. I apologized to my mother, cause I know she just wants to help, and we got to the village. There my grandmother leapt out of the van to hug a 50-year-old, one-armed, toothless, one-eyed man whom she used to babysit, and her neighbor. She was so happy she practically skipped through the streets to show us the house she grew up in, the bench she got her first kiss, and the pools of ocean water caught in the rocks where she would swim. It was magical, but she burned herself out. She spent most of the trip resting with my mother and her sister while the rest of us toured the island, played in the water, and got history lessons from my grandfather. That was the last week of August. She went into the hospital the day after we got back. She died the first week of October. My family is actually back there now, and my father reports that everyone is much better behaved this time around, and the trip is much more relaxing. And this is the end of today's video. I hope you liked it, and don't forget to comment an anecdote or experience similar to the topic of the video. Leave your like, share if you like the video, and lastly, don't forget to activate the little bell so you don't miss any of our daily videos. Bye-bye.